Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. I'm Brittany Campbell Turner, CEO and founder of Constructor. Now, who and what is a constructor? It's not limited to being a constructor or someone who constructs. It's not limited to real estate, design, construction, workplace, or facilities. You join the constructor community if you care about doing the right thing, serving people with the built environment, creating and maintaining impacting quality spaces for people. We do this by building strong relationships, leading in data utilization, and systematizing the way we interact with physical spaces. So join us in our community by going to Constructor. That's constructrr.com and follow me on social media. Now, Ryan, our guest, is a new member to the constructor community by joining us today in an interview. And if you are watching, you are in for a treat. You may be watching on Periscope, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, and Facebook. But if you want to participate in the discussion, we are just about to open up a Clubhouse room, and I'll be putting that link in the chat shortly. We'll be leaving actually a little bit time at the end so you can ask Ryan any questions live through Clubhouse, a little bit like a call-in radio show. So I'll be introducing our guest and saying a few words for my sponsor and get into the interview. So Ryan Rugg, she is currently a partner at IBM responsible for America's blockchain team, helping to enhance client solutions and capabilities for building digital ecosystems. She provides strategic guidance for operational and governance considerations, technology roadmaps, and services infrastructure to help clients. Ryan also believes in delivering through diversity in management positions, increasing profitability. And over the course of her career, Ryan has spearheaded several efforts to further diversity and retention across financial services. She has so much on her resume. Of course, you can look her up on LinkedIn, but I'm so looking forward to this interview. So really quick, a word from our sponsor. Yes, your exceptional space. For landlords looking for higher margins on your office spaces, you should strongly consider partnering with Yes, your exceptional space to use the Yes Playbook, an all-in-one tool for building a successful, flexible workspace brand. This playbook focuses on giving the tools to create not just a physical space or environment, but a stellar experience. You can learn more at yes-spaces.com. All right, so we're going to bring our guest up to the stage. Hi, Ryan. Welcome to Constructor.
Thank you, Brittany. Happy to be here. I appreciate the offer.
Oh, man. So you are, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, you're a blockchain service leader for the Americas at IBM, and you've been there for a short period of time, just 9 months. So you've been managing a few key areas. But before we get into that, how are you?
I'm great. At changing jobs during a pandemic I would have never guessed that's what would have happened, but it's been absolutely incredible. The team here has been so inclusive and, thank goodness for tech. I have the ability to, meet a ton of people on a daily basis. And I actually feel like, in one way, this whole COVID is like democratized, like being able to get meetings with people. Like everyone has 10 minutes here or there for a quick video chat versus trying to, navigate schedules and locations. So it's been great. But yeah, as you mentioned, I am relatively new to IBM, but excited to be here and kind of share the journey that we're on right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the topic that we're going to be discussing today, for those of you who see the subject line there, we're going to be talking about the digital health pass, which is really, really relevant these days, given the changing environment that we're seeing with the Delta variant. And just what people are asking for right now is going to be really critical for that communication about where you are, what you're doing, and what your health status is going to be very, very important. So we're going to dig into that a little bit later. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk with you about that digital health pass, but just want to get a sense, high level, what are you up to? Like, what are those key areas that you do focus on at IBM?
Yeah, that's a really good, question. So credentialing overall is a huge focus. Digital identity, digital health pass. IBM's been working on this since 2018 and working with governments, commercial, a lot of different entities on that. And it started out as a learning credential where we're working with the National Clearinghouse for Students, where we think about you know the economy, and especially like during COVID and making sure people get back to work. And how do you have a holistic record, like a skills wallet of your identity and your credentials that you have? So they started that back in 2019. We actually presented at the White House on that. And that's been live since 2020, working with several universities. So think about it almost as a decentralized LinkedIn.
Mhm.
With LinkedIn, they actually own your data, right? Like we don't have access to it. And like, I mean, there's some permissioning, right? And people have to connect to you, but ultimately people can kind of see your history, and it not necessarily all your skills are included within that. So I think it's a really great place where we started back in 19, and now it's evolved to, vaccination tracking. It's evolved to, talk about digital health pass and the work that we're doing there that talks about, your COVID test, your vaccine, and, even brought to light now more as you talked about the Delta variant, like how is travel? Like travel has been difficult if you don't have your negative test, if you don't have that piece of paper that proves that you're vaccinated, it's caused delays. And, people also don't feel 100% confident traveling yet. So, we've really evolved from learning to digital health pass, and kind of expanding the functionality, as well to other states in addition to just New York, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So I mean, what you're touching on is a number of things. It's identity, right? It's tracking like who the person is and verifying that, their identity is accurate and true, and you know, that's backed by blockchain at this point. And that's it sounds like that was a key area of focus. Also that security standpoint, right? Like that again is a huge area of focus. I mean, obviously it's evolved into like what we now are talking about, this digital health pass, but are there any other focus areas that kind of are teeter-tottering around and kind of have help for this not just this solution but other solutions that you're leading within IBM? Um, basically, what are those themes, I suppose?
Yeah, there's several different what we call identity instruments out there if you think about Brittany. Like there's everything from driver's license, insurance card, birth certificates, work school badges, and like how much information is really out there on us and how much control do we have on it. And now being online more than ever before in the past, like, hackers are out there, to your point about security, combing these honeypots for information on our identity. And there's a huge amount of fraud, and how do we actually control that? So there's definitely other areas that we're focused on expanding this to.
Mhm.
The key ones that we're live on are the learning credential, as well as a digital health pass within New York State, which is evolving also, like to other states and other companies. Like, in September, a lot of companies will back to work. How do you do that in a safe manner? And like, I think what's really unique about blockchain technology is the whole security around it, but also like the issue and the verifier. Like you only share your credential or your health pass or whatever the, identity, instrument you want to do with parties that you want. And I think that's what really makes blockchain unique for this, and great for a perfect use case for this technology to really start to scale. And, as we move into Web 3.0 and what that means, and, I'm also extremely passionate about digital assets and like what's going on in that space. And, regulators are opining, and, imagine having a digital wallet for that as well, right? And,
Mhm.
if we think about all these different, subsidy checks that people are getting during the pandemic, are they going to the right people? Are they actually being cashed? Are they being utilized in the way that the government actually intends? So I see this becoming a much more broad initiative as we kind of move into, as I mentioned, Web 3.0.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful. Just to kind of pull the parts and pieces together of what you're working on and how it ultimately ties. Uh, yes, there's this tangible solution of like the pass itself, but it's looking at it from a perspective of how do you manage your personal data, and what connects to you as a person from an identity perspective, like that certainly is huge. Awesome. So, um, curious, what led you to the world of blockchain?
That's a great story. So back in, so I have been in and around this space a little over 5 years. I went down the rabbit hole. I had read an article in The Economist about blockchain, and just kind of became absolutely fascinated. At that time, I joke I'm a recovering banker. I spent most of my career on Wall Street. So at that time, I was at Morgan Stanley, but became fixated on this technology and how it could be so impactful. Like, I started my career out in technology at Lehman Brothers, and graduated university and thought at 21 years old I was going to be able to come in and completely renovate the whole entire infrastructure of a bank, to quickly realize that I was doing VLOOKUPs on spreadsheet. And I was like, I did not go to university for 4 years for this. So, ended up working my way to the front office, and that's probably, was on the trading floor for quite so many years. Probably why I'm so fixated on digital assets and cryptos as store of values as people kind of evolve in this space. So then in 2016, at the time, R3 was a consortium of 65 different banks. And I thought, I'd taken a Python class to see if I wanted to go back to coding and my C++ and Java days, and realized that I'd missed technology a lot more than I actually thought. So had met with the folks over at R3 and thought it was a perfect marriage of my, financial background as well as my technology background. So made the leap of faith over there in 2016, and then never really looked back.
That is an awesome story. So, I mean, you having been tied to the kind of financial industry and having worked on Wall Street, like, you certainly have a perspective that is, obviously more um, financially um, minded, but you see blockchain so much more broadly than just that, because lots of people will tie it primarily to cryptocurrency. But as we know, and lots of people in the constructor community know, because we talk about blockchain a lot, that is definitely not the limitation, and there's so much more to it. So that's awesome how you've kind of come along in your journey here and recognized, to your point, the value of a digital asset. That's really cool.
And I think also another great area that we haven't touched upon, but you kind of triggered the thought, was, we've done a lot of work in industrials and distribution, right? Supply chain and tracking of that. We're working with one large, distributor right now that has thousands and thousands of suppliers, and pallets go missing, and there's massive disputes, and how you resolve that, and how you actually know where the pallet is the whole time during the whole entire journey, and trying to kind of shorten the time, but also create a more immutable record of these assets across the life. So to your point, like, blockchain has definitely evolved since the early days of Satoshi, to where we are now, and the different smart contracts to automatic trigger payouts and what we're doing. And it's exciting to see a lot of this stuff go live now, for folks that have been in it for several years. For we were kind of in that trough of disillusionment for a little bit, but now seeing that things are going live, it's been absolutely wonderful.
Yes, yes. Gartner's life cycle, right? That's exactly it. I mean, we're trying to figure out, okay, well, what are these tangible applications today? And I love your colleague, our industry colleague, Anthony Day. I just wanted to give him a really quick shout out. He is definitely known for debunking any of the myths out there. Like blockchain, I love his podcast. Blockchain doesn't won't save the world, right? That's the
Yeah,
name of the podcast.
definitely.
Man, for those of you who have not followed him, he's definitely worth a follow on LinkedIn, and a good listen to his podcast. But yeah, to your point, there's just so many. There's so many opportunities to tie to the tangible today, and supply chain is a huge one, and I think that that's something that a lot of people are seeing the connection to finally, of, okay, yeah, I can see how this actually applies to the construction industry, because supply chain is 100% tied into it. We've been hit by it extremely hard this year, particularly by so many material cost rises, delayed materials, that kind of thing. So I think more than ever, we're recognizing how big that piece of the business really, really matters. So really, really cool stuff that you guys are already working on that and have been for a
I'm
little
just gonna
while.
close my shade real quick. I am having this weird, like the sun is like setting in my face. So one second, hold on.
Absolutely, no problem. So with that, guys, here I'm going to really, really, really quick reset while she's doing that. For those of you who don't know, Ryan Rugg, she's with IBM. She is the blockchain service leader for the Americas at IBM. And we are on Periscope, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So for those of you who are watching out there, and if you would like to join us on Clubhouse, we're going to post the Clubhouse link in a few minutes. I would say maybe in about 20 to 30 minutes, we'll go ahead and put an opportunity out there for you guys to ask questions to Ryan if you have any questions. And we'll just make sure that we'll ask her during this interview. I do thank you, Marcus, for posting the Clubhouse link. If you want to join on Clubhouse, just look in the chat. We'll make sure to have you pulled into the room. So Ryan is back with us. So now we're going to dig into the digital pass specifically. So March, I believe that's when you guys came out with the digital health pass. And I think what I'd love to do is just really dig into like what the features are, particularly. If you could just break that down for us, like what is it? What does it help us do? And then how are companies using it? How are individuals using it?
So New York State really wanted to stimulate the economy again, like bring confidence for people to start returning to concerts and restaurants and travel and all that. So, back, as you said, in March, we launched the first phase of it. And the first event that we did it was at the Barclays Center, for people to be able to come to an event and know that everyone in there with confidence had received a negative COVID test within, 24 hours. As well as being vaccinated. So similar to when you travel, Brittany, it's like it creates in your wallet, you get a QR code, basically how you do for a plane ride. And it's your wallet, your digital health pass, where you scan it and it shows that, Ryan Rugg was vaccinated on X date, received a negative COVID test, and the history of it. And the wonderful thing about this is you only share it with people you want to share it with. Right. So it's not someone else owning your data, owning your vaccination records. It's you as an individual. And that's truly what makes this solutions different than other ones out there, where you can only share it with, parties that you want to. So in this case, New York State was the issuer of the credential. And then, you were the holder of your digital wallet, and then you could bring it to different verifiers. So, we've now gone to Excelsior Pass Plus, which is really exciting that we rolled out last week. The team did an absolutely incredible job. And now airlines are going to be starting to accept it in broader ecosystems, because really, it's critical to have a digital identity. Like, why do we still carry around plastic things for driver's license? Why do we carry, so many different paper versions of our identity versus having that and being able to share it with, to be able to control our own data and only share. And like, there's so much more data out there on us than ever before. And you really want to be able to control who sees it and when they see it. And like, that's why I think blockchain technology is uniquely designed from a security standpoint, immutability, but also, a security standpoint. I mean, going back to like only sharing it with people you want to share it with.
So you mentioned verifiers. You mentioned the state of New York, right? The state of New York is rolling out the Excelsior. This is kind of the phase 2 of this pass. And then what you're able to do is not only show that you're vaccinated, or if you have had a positive or negative COVID test ultimately, and you can determine who you're going to show it to, and only to them, by using sort of the platform on your phone. And now, so you mentioned the verifiers. Now, who are the verifiers?
Well, in the case of New York, it's really, restaurants, music venues, theaters, air rolling out to airline industries, that's who you're the holder. So the issuer would be New York. I'm the holder of my digital wallet, my digital identity. And then the verifier is who you actually choose to be able to verify who you are, right? To prove that you're the customer, to prove that, in fact, that this is a good credential. So it's where you want to show to get into, like a restaurant could be a great example, or, an airline could be it, or a cruise line would verify, but you're the holder of that identity, but they're the one that's actually using the credential, the qualification to let you into the restaurant venue or whatever the case is.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. So that being said, I work in workplace. Like we do a lot of workplace build outs. And so as we're thinking through like what return to office looks like, soft opening, full reopening, all the different phases of what that looks like, and everybody's thinking about what that looks like right now. What do you think are the possibilities? Obviously, the state of New York is an issue where they have so many opportunities now to just make it available for businesses. But how do you see this translating into the workplace environment as an example?
Yeah, that's, great. And like talking about like within construction and like all the different insurance that you have to have and different credentials to be able to to access and start performing the work. And, how much time and effort goes into that to proving Ryan Rugg has all the right qualification, has the right, insurance policy, has all that. So like within your space, I really see that being able to make an impact in like trucking license and, all the different kind of license that go around it to be able to actually do the work. So I think it's really critical. And, from just an employer standpoint, as they're bringing people back to work, and different employers have different kind of takes on, mandating, some are mandating vaccinations, some aren't, and I'm not here to opine what's right or what's wrong in that. But if
We
you
could be
are,
here for hours if we
I
were
know,
going to
but
do
if you
that.
are mandating it, like,
Yep.
and that person lost their paper vaccination, card, and how are they actually going to do it? We've gotten APIs and data feeds pulling out of this data from the lab corps and different ones with this information on it. So like, could there be fraud in vaccinations? Like, could you show somebody else's? Could you forge it? Potentially, right? I mean, it's a piece of paper, right? So there's definitely where this is not relying on the piece of paper. We're actually pulling it directly from the sites that have done the vaccinations and the hospitals and the lab corps and other areas to prove that you're vaccinated. So there's also like, again, I'm not here to opine if you should or you shouldn't, but if you are, it makes it a lot more easy and transparent. And like, you can also, if your workers were exposed to someone in the office that had COVID and they got the negative test, and then are you going to rely on an email? And it's like making sure that everyone checks the right numbers to make sure that the test was done in 24 hours. And so it really depends on each kind of employer and what they're mandating. But I can see this bringing back people a lot easier and faster, and making it more efficient.
Hmm. And we already talked a bit about security, but one big question I have is, I bet there's a concern as to how are companies going to bring different solutions like this from a cost perspective. So would you be able to speak to that?
From an implementation, I mean, it really depends on the size of the organization. But
Okay.
this new, from a timing perspective, this new Excelsior Plus, we turned around in 3 weeks. So
Okay.
from a timing perspective, it can be really efficient because it's already built out, right? Like we have the asset already built out and done. And I think that's what's really important. And it depends on the functionality that the entity wants, right? And how much. If they just want a basic one, it's not going to be a high cost because the asset's already built out. But again, their systems that they currently have, and the requirements and how many credentials are they going to want in the actual, platform they have. And they actually ultimately end up, being the issuer of it themselves. So it's like, depends like, what their level of expertise and how much training we have to do because, we're an enabler, like we're just a technology provider. So it's each entity kind of depends on its own. But I will say from a timing perspective, it's really short now, which I think, as we mentioned, IBM's been on this journey since 2018. So, it's been a lot of learning and building along this journey. So excited to see what other kind of industries we start broaching into, as well as, other credentials, identity, assets people are interested in.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. So I mean, as far as New York rolling it out? I mean, did they have any hurdles rolling it out initially, and then kind of this second phase? How might have those hurdles been addressed? Just curious as to kind of the process.
Well, I would say like New York was really dedicated to this from day one,
Okay.
right? They, bringing people back to the city. I mean, that's a huge, revenue driver for the city, for the state is tourism, right? So they were extremely focused, all hands on deck, to get this done. And the original one took, roughly a month and a half, 2 months. So it wasn't even that long. And like that we had dedication from the top down. So I think that is one thing that is critical, making sure that all the right parties are at the table, that there's no, back and forth. Should we do it? Should we not do it? They were dedicated. So I would say that's something that when you're going on this journey, make sure you have all the right constituents, all the right parties at the table to do this, because it can move pretty fast. So that's one of the big things I would say, just making sure the key stakeholders are there from the get-go.
Yeah. Well, and I would say, as we're thinking about our return to office strategies, it's a similar thing. It's getting all the right decision makers to the table and getting everybody really just aligned on what the approach is going to be. So it's very similar. Oftentimes we're asking ourselves like, okay, what's that interconnection between IT, HR, our workplace department, who's actually going to be thinking about how these spaces connect. But this is, to your point, kind of that other piece that people would need to really be thinking about. How is this being tracked, and how are you going to put the ownership of your health data in the person's hands, but also make it so that it's available to the right people at the right time, in order for really that comfort level, for the verifiers, the employers, if you will, to have when they're considering, okay, well, how are we going to bring people back, whether they're testing negative, or making sure that they're verifying that vaccination. So very, very interesting stuff. Yeah, I mean, back to that decision maker point you're making, it's all about change management and setting expectations, uh, and making sure people know, like, okay, this is how you engage, this is how you use the product, this is those kind of things, and this is what you'll expect as far as how your data will be used. So, I mean, that kind of thing. If people aren't aware of blockchain and the benefits of it initially, I bet there are people that are skeptical. Like, how would you address some of those kind of myths, if you will? Because I'm sure you guys are getting a lot of questions and concerns about it.
No, a ton. And like, and I think that, early days blockchain, it was definitely overhyped, that it could solve everything. It could solve world poverty. It can solve this. It can solve that, where people almost stop believing in the tech. But if you go back to kind of, blockchain technology has been around since like the 1990s originally, with a group of researchers to basically timestamp and documentations, and like being able to, do that, to then, the whole rise of the digital assets in the space there, to now where we are, and like the security of the wallet, right? Like the cryptographic keys, and like being able to immutable record, like really going back to the core tenements of what this technology is key, and understanding that, because there are a lot of myths out there about what it can and can't do. But I think that as we are in this digital first environment, having a digital form of your identity and being able to share it with only parties you want is really key.
Yeah.
It's just so much data out there on us being collected on a daily basis, and who actually has access to it. And if there's hacks and that, and you not being able to share it with parties you want to share it with, I think is key. So I think that going back to the fundamentals of this technology and really what it's was built for and what it's good at is key. And I think that we're starting to see that by the adoption that we're seeing across the different entities and states that are starting to use it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that being said, there are there are businesses, particularly in New York, at least from what I've seen in the news over the past week, or gyms, restaurants, at least those two. I know that there are businesses outside of that that are really looking at having some sort of uh, proof that you've either been vaccinated, or you have a negative result on a test. Like, what do you foresee happening next, because of this Excelsior Pass? Like, do you see that, um, it's going to just have an uptick in businesses? And of course, this is just your own opinion. You don't have to speak to like what you actually might know what's happening, of course. But just curious as to your thoughts.
Well, the goal is to restore confidence, right? And,
Mm,
being a fellow New Yorker, I can tell you that the pandemic like hit the city really hard.
yeah.
Everything was closed down. Like in our apartment building, like we basically couldn't leave the confines of our four walls, right? They closed down our gym, they closed down the playroom, they closed down playrooms, they closed down restaurants. You really couldn't leave. So a lot of New Yorkers went through a lot of, trauma due to that. Like they just didn't feel comfortable leaving their apartment for quite some time. So really what I'm hoping that this does is, reinstills that confidence and allows them to feel comfortable going into different venues and restaurants and knowing that they're with parties that are, negative and that there's not, these super spreader kind of events that are going on and, ultimately allow travel again. I mean, with this Delta variant and the way that the numbers are upticking, like who knows what's going to happen next? And like, it's the city was hit extremely hard as well as other states and businesses. It's kind of been really tough, but like how do you get people back out, living their lives and doing that? So I'm hoping that, kind of phase one, this reinstills confidence within different, states and entities, but ultimately like it expands into driver's license and fishing and parks. And, there's just so many different credentials out there that should be digitized, that shouldn't be a paper form of it. So I'm hoping that we continue on the journey to kind of expand it for all of our clients as well as, other industries that I'm sure I haven't even thought about or addressed yet, like the learning credential network that we started out with. Like I see a really great with potentially with like tie into COVID, like the medical workers, right? Being able to onboard people in a faster, more efficient way. Them saying that, Ryan Rugg got our medical degree X, it was in good standing. And like, that takes 60 to 90 days right now. And like when we having these spikes and these different variants that are going on, like how do we bring people to the front lines faster? So I would love to kind of see it expand into the medical industry as well with like the credentials for doctors and, also with telemed now that's so getting so big and making sure that people are getting the care they need to because so many people haven't been able to and because of the high rates within certain areas and I still remember when in New York when they brought in the ships for kind of backup healthcare. They did pop-up tents in Central Park. It was a crazy experience and making sure that people can get the care they need when they need it, I think is crucial.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of went there from a number of different directions, and I appreciate that because you're not only thinking about the expanse of how something like this, like an identity pass, can help people in different industries, but you're also thinking about the demand of what is really needed in order to help people get the care that they need, but also so that we can really get back to some sense of normalcy, right? So that people feel like they can live their lives in a way that is fulfilling again, and they feel like they're not on edge all the time anymore, especially with a highly populated area like New York City. I mean, you we were living in a condo in Chicago about 2 years ago, and, you pop out of your condo and you're right there, right there with the traffic with everybody else. You're pressing the same buttons on the elevator. You're walking down the street, you're gonna be opening the same, door handle as someone else just going into the grocery store. It's just heavily populated, and that's just how you live your life. Like, there's a requirement for you to be around a ton of people. It's a little bit different from suburban life for those who are not really um needing to kind of go out and about, like, obviously you can order in food and that, but to your point, that traumatic effect of like being closed down in one space all the time, like, we can go down the rabbit hole of mental impacts. Like, I can only imagine just wanting to get back to a level of normalcy to breathe again.
And
and
New
just
Yorkers are social people. Like they really are. The food, the culture, the arts, they want to be out and about. Like, you pay top dollar to live in these tiny little apartments because you love the city you live in. And like a true story, I had one of my neighbors like come in my apartment after we had been gone for a period of time and asked to open all the windows, the sliding glass door when she walked in, and then was in the apartment for 5 minutes and said, "This is the closest I've been to a person in 8 months. I'm having a little bit of a panic attack. I have to go." Like it is like it
wow.
is definitely taking an effect on a lot of people. So any bit of confidence we can help with bringing these people back to a level of comfort, to know that they're safe, to know that everyone in the venue has received negative codes, to know that they're vaccinated or not, whatever, I think is really important. And I think the work that New York's done is absolutely incredible, like to give these New Yorkers the confidence back to start traveling and live their lives because, mental health is no joke. And it's like these people that have been locked in their apartments for quite some time, you want them to start feeling some normalcy again.
Yeah, yeah, it's real. And on the flip side, if there's a health concern and you can't get the vaccine, it's demonstrating that okay, yep, I've taken my test in order to, get into this place of business that requires it if I need to enter into it. And I think that alternative that's there in the past is really critical for those who maybe have a health concern that where it's not recommended for a vaccine to actually take place, right? Like everybody doesn't know every single situation, but I hear of them all the time, right? So it's I think that balance and understanding like okay, this is the kind of data that you can track and monitor in order for you to enter into society in the way that you need to navigate through it. I think that's really 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 critical as well. It's
And we've
important.
also done some work on tracking vaccinations, like were
Okay.
they kept at the proper temperature? Because there's all these like rumors coming out now. It's like, oh, people that, didn't receive their vaccination, not in a hospital, it wasn't stored properly. That's why they're getting COVID. And if that's true or not, I have no idea because there's
Sure.
not enough stats out there on that to prove it either way. But tracking and tracing the actual vaccine from the manufacturer to the end user and knowing and then working with big data and analytics on that to kind of study the behavior, like what is how long does the vaccination actually last? Is it there's difference in it between the different manufacturers, between the cold storage, between the distribution once they opened kind of the package. So I think it's really interesting work that we're doing there too, and like more to come because I can see that and kind of being a way of like the future also.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the supply chain we were just talking about, right? Like, how are you tracking what um, the most important things about making sure that ultimately it's administered well and is going to be effective, and it's just making sure all those touch points happen properly all the way through, which is that's really cool, huh? Okay. All right, we touched on workplace a bit already, and I wanted to open it up for those who have questions. I see a couple people out there. If there's anybody who has questions for Ryan, please place that in the chat. We'd be happy to ask Ryan those questions. Um, we're talking particularly about the digital health pass that IBM has rolled out and New York has adopted as the Excelsior pass. And they're really figuring out ways to make sure um, people have the ability to hold their data about their health, whether they're vaccinated or they're testing negatively, and able to show that to verifiers, places of business that are asking for verification of the data, and only to those businesses and organizations that they want to show it to. So that's what we're talking about today. We've talked a little bit about Ryan's journey to blockchain and what she's doing at IBM. But if you have any specific questions about this health pass, um, she is a great resource, and now is your time, so don't miss it. Um, Ryan, is there anything that you and I didn't touch on that you feel is really important for us to cover, given the constructor audience that it's workplace, that it's facilities management, that it's construction, architecture, all of those components. Is there anything that you think that would be valuable for the audience?
So we touched on digital identity, which I think is great. We touched a little bit on supply track and trace, which I think your audience is definitely really interested in that, especially ones that have multiple suppliers and dispute resolutions and being able to do that in a more efficient way. And we've rolled it out to a couple people in the construction space around that also. And then we didn't really touch on digital assets, but we really didn't talk about payments a lot. But what does that mean, and how does that become more efficient as we move? You have several central banks focusing on central bank digital currency. You have stable coins out there. You have cryptos. What's the difference on them all? Like, you have now like online payment providers like PayPal accepting crypto. Like, what is the evolution of payments, and like what does it look like in the future? I think would be really kind of interesting for to talk a little bit about, or at least for your listeners to kind of understand how the landscape is changing. And I
Mhm.
think the big reason it's changing is you're starting to see regulators opine on this. Everyone from the OCC saying that banks can be host nodes, to you're seeing state of Wyoming opening charters to for digital banks. So I think it's going to be impactful. I mean, I'm sure there's massive payment gaps, dispute resolutions, procurement, all that within your industry they go through, and how do you make that more efficient? So I think those are kind of the key three areas that I think are be really interesting to your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we talked about identity already. There's so much credentialing required. There's so many things related to your point, quality of materials coming on to site and just kind of verifying that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many areas. I mean, payment is one key thing that uh, yeah, many people are working on right now, and I think there's so much opportunity for gaining efficiencies in this industry at large. I think there's a lot of opportunity to create better data management in general, and having the right data at the right time. That's why we have these conversations about blockchain on the Constructor podcast too. So that's great. I'm glad you're seeing it too, and that's awesome. So I'm not seeing any questions coming through here. Um, and that's okay,
I have a
unless Marcus
question.
has a question. Okay, Marcus
Yeah.
has a question for us.
Um, I used to work at a blockchain startup that was focused on, I would say, mainly verify.
You broke up. I don't know if it's on my side.
That was on
Okay,
my side. Apologies. Marcus,
Okay.
can you restate the question?
okay. So I was a part of a blockchain startup that was focused on verifiable credentials, and so I find the your aspects of speaking about that extremely interesting. But as we move into supply chain and IoT and linking that together with payment with um, programmable money for how do you see uh, what within that space, what do you think there's going to be multiple dispute resolution layers, and how are we going to get people and these different organizations to be able to sit down together and realize that we can work together in order to solve these problems, because federated models are extremely difficult to implement.
Yeah, coming from a consortium in my prior role at R3, definitely you hit on the nail on the head. Like, getting the parties together is by far the hardest part. Because they're not used to that collaboration model. It's more of a compete model. So getting to sit down and discuss the standards and the protocols and the ways they're going to implement it has definitely been one of the biggest challenges. Like, by far, but there, within the digital credentialing, like there are standards that are starting to emerge, where like VCI for which we're using now, and Excelsior Pass, and like you're starting to see these standards where like-minded people are coming together in technology side as well as on the business side to start to kind of like scale this. And like your point on the payment side, that's basically what R3 was born out of, right? It was a bunch of different banks trying to figure out how they could come together to look at, cross-border payments and all that and how they were going to kind of settle for that. And you're starting to see, kind of that emerge again also with the central banks. Like they're starting to collaborate as well. BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, did a great paper on something like 80 or 85% of all central banks are either, investing, have a pilot running within this like digital dollar, digital fiat area. So you're starting to see more collaboration versus competition, which I think is great. But Marcus, to your point, it's going to be a challenge. And, because people think like that's their secret sauce, their operations, which, ultimately that's not what's going to take your revenue to like, 2, 3x at the end of the day. But there's definitely been that compete versus cooperate kind of push pull that we've seen in the marketplace. And certain industries struggle more than others. It's just certain ones collaborate more and versus others.
For those, I have a follow-up question to that. For those industries that are collaborating a little bit more than others, how are they collaborating, and what is the I guess what is the incentive for them to collaborate, and how can these other industries that are less collaborative, how can they look at them as a resource to further their efforts?
Yeah, the ones that I've seen, like, collaborating best in regards and like what is like the first mover advantage, right? Is what the kind of the question is. Like, what do you get by, contributing all this IP and time and resources and so forth. And it's different in the different industries, like, when I was at R3 with the banks, some of like the early projects that they were collaborating on, we put, project frameworks together where everything from they got lower fees if they were donating more IP to sometimes they got like larger ownership on it, which I actually discourage that because that slowed adoption in certain ones. Like if the early adopters owned larger proportions of the network, then some of the smaller entities felt like they'd always be trumped, right? And they never actually have like a truly, say in the structure of the application. So I think it's really important to kind of set expectations, and also like the for-profit profit model has also been interesting where people seem to want trust more the non-for-profit model where like no one's actually making money off of this. It's just making the industry more efficient and, overall and better for, all versus some. So there's different models that you can kind of go through and like, we've actually developed like different worksheets on like what's important and like to you and what's not from a governance, from a standard standpoint. And sometimes it's just, standards, right? Which are key to all of these different applications and, who's developing the standards, who's owning them, how you come together, how you build out that network framework, the governance around it, all that. So there's a lot of different models that I've seen. I said that the ones that I've kind of highlighted that work the best, are where not one person owns a network because then it discourages, or a larger percentage, I should say, because that discourages people from coming on. They truly want like the idea and going back to the core characteristics of blockchain, like decentralized, where, no third party owns it, controls it, where, all parties can kind of collaborate on it. So I think that's key when you're thinking about bringing these different parties together and setting that kind of framework up early on so everyone knows the roles and responsibilities and like what the end game is. But, being a first mover, I mean, from a adoption standpoint and being able to drive those efficiency and lower expense ratios, it's going to speak to your bottom line ultimately.
Thank you, Marcus,
Thank
for the
you.
question. Yeah. Ryan, thanks for that that answer. I think it puts things into perspective as far as how hard it is to kind of put things into to live adoption, if you will, when you're trying to get people to collaborate and do a little bit of what do you want to call it, co-petition, cooperating together in order to compete. But I think that's how we're going to see kind of the next phase come through for a number of industries. Obviously, the financial industry, we can look to the models that are established already on moving us forward. But I think other industries will absolutely need to come together and figure out, okay, well, who are the right people to bring together, especially from a regulatory standpoint, making sure that you're kind of checking all those boxes. Really good stuff.
And the way it's evolved, like that I've saw like early days, was working groups. But like the one thing that I will, discourage about a working group, don't have a working group for the sake of a working group. Actually have a clear timeline with deadlines and like start testing and experimenting. Let's just not meet on a weekly, monthly, whatever the, kind of cadence is to talk about these issues. You know, talk about it. We're going to build it, and it's like I tell my kids, it's okay to fail, right?
Yep.
And you have to recognize, but being able to learn from your experience and pivot, is kind of one of the most meaningful things that I've taken away from being in this space. It's like, two steps forward, one step back is actually success, right? And it's like, each time you get better at it until, you're going to be able to create this. But, working groups are great, but don't have them for the sake of just having them. Bringing parties together, like-minded people, make sure you have a deliverable too. Make sure you actually have an output that you're going to do. And if it's, a pilot, an MVP, whatever that you share with the other parties as part of the working. So it's like, truly a learning experience, I think is key, but make sure you have some sort of deliverable, not just a working group for the sake of it.
Yeah, that's key, right? Like you want to make sure you're making progress and not just talking about it. Yeah, that wonderful advice. Well, Ryan, I want to thank you so much for participating in this interview. How can people get in touch with you or learn more about what you're up to so they can digest it some more deeply?
Absolutely. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on there quite frequently, posting new updates about what's going on kind of in this space. So if you just want to hear more, learn more, I write blogs, white papers, all that. So ton of it's on LinkedIn. And then, always happy to have a conversation again with your kind of group, Brittany, whatever it helps people kind of, it's really important for me that it's an education, that we're it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I think it's important to work together during this time.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Ryan.
I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks. So now another word from our sponsor. We want to thank Yes, Your Exceptional Space for sponsoring today's show. For more information about your exceptional space, download their white paper by clicking the Get Started button at yes-spaces.com. Last but not least, again, I am Brittany Campbell Turner, CEO and founder of Constructor. Follow me on social media at BrittanyCT. And if you want to participate in our discussions during the week, join us on Clubhouse by going to Brittany.club. You can join the Property Technology Club or the Smart City Community Clubs. If you'd like to set notifications for these events, you can in order for you to participate them. You can also look us up on constructor.com to learn more about us. So with that, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the interview today with Ryan. Everyone, have a wonderful evening and catch you next time.